The Smoke of An-Loc. The morning of October 15th, 1968, begins like any other in the contested village of An-Loc, South Vietnam. Marine Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock adjusts his scope and settles into the tall grass of Hill 55, the white feather in his boonie hat catching the pre-dawn breeze. Through his Unertel 10X scope, mounted on his beloved Winchester Model 70, the hamlet below spreads like a child's toy village. Thatched roofs, narrow dirt paths winding between rice paddies, smoke rising from cooking fires. Then the distant rumble of diesel engines shatters the silence. Hathcock's hands tighten on his rifle as North Vietnamese regulars pour into the hamlet's southern edge. 40 soldiers, maybe more, moving in coordinated fire teams. Their AK-47s chatter as they sweep through the village's narrow paths. This should be routine. Observe, identify high-value targets, eliminate threats to American operations. But through his scope, Hathcock watches something that makes his stomach clench. These aren't military targets. An elderly man clutches a walking stick, stumbling as he tries to flee. 2 young mothers cradle infants against their chests, one with a growing stain of crimson on her sleeve. A teenage boy drapes his unconscious sister across his shoulders, her breathing shallow and rapid. They twist ankles in rice paddy ditches, cut themselves on bamboo stakes, fall and rise and fall again. "Burke, call for dust off," Hathcock whispers to his spotter, Lance Corporal Burke, who's already reaching for the radio. The response crackles back negative. Too much enemy fire, too dangerous. Hathcock stares through his scope, watching civilians caught in crossfire that tears through the morning air like metal rain. The rules of engagement are crystal clear. Reconnaissance and selective elimination of high-value targets. He's not supposed to reveal his position for a rescue operation. Every tactical manual he's ever read says the same thing. Maintain concealment, preserve the mission. But the white phosphorus grenades in his pack weren't designed for killing. They're smoke markers, meant to signal aircraft, standard equipment that every sniper carries for emergencies. Hathcock makes a decision that defies every piece of training he's received since boot camp. "I'm going down there." Burke stares at him in disbelief. "Gunny, that's 40 NVA soldiers. You walk into that village, you're walking into a kill zone. Then I better make some smoke." The first grenade lands 30 meters from the village edge, erupting in a billowing cloud of white smoke that drifts across the main path where the wounded civilians are trapped. The second and third follow in quick succession, creating an expanding wall of concealment that swallows the hamlet in acrid fog. Hathcock slings his rifle across his back and begins moving down the hill. If stories like this make you question what you'd do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this camp. And stay with us for the next chapters. How do you weigh duty against conscience when both demand everything you have? The white phosphorus creates a choking fog that burns Hathcock's eyes and throat as he moves through the smoke-covered village. The NVA soldiers fire wildly into the billowing clouds, their muzzle flashes visible, but their targets invisible. What follows challenges every assumption about sniper warfare Hathcock has learned in 2 tours of Vietnam. Instead of the patient, invisible killer that made him legendary, he becomes something unprecedented, a smoke-covered medic moving through chaos with methodical precision. The first civilian he reaches is the elderly man with shrapnel in his leg. Hathcock doesn't speak Vietnamese, but pain needs no translation. He helps the man to his feet, half carrying him toward a collapsed wall that offers temporary shelter. "American," the man whispers in broken English, his eyes wide with confusion. The young mother with the crying infant comes next. Her arm seeps from a gash, but she clutches her baby with fierce protection. Hathcock guides her through the smoke, using hand signals and gentle pressure to show her the way to safety. The teenage boy follows, still carrying his sister, his young face set with determination that reminds Hathcock of Marines he's served with. Each rescue requires navigation by memory and instinct through the phosphorus fog. The smoke that conceals him from the NVA also blinds him, forcing him to rely on landmarks glimpsed in those first moments through his scope. The well, the market stall, the shrine with its small Buddha statue. The NVA soldiers adapt quickly, spreading out to flank the smokescreen. Hathcock realizes he needs to become a sniper again, but under impossible conditions, shooting while moving through smoke, with wounded civilians depending on his protection. Through brief gaps in the phosphorus clouds, he takes 3 carefully aimed shots with his Winchester. Each one drops an NVA soldier who's gotten too close to his improvised casualty collection point behind the collapsed wall. Burke's voice crackles over the radio from Hill 55. "Gunny, reinforcements are 20 minutes out. That's a lifetime in your situation. 20 minutes. Hathcock counts 11 wounded civilians now huddled behind the wall, some barely conscious, others crying softly in pain and terror. The smoke from his first 3 grenades is beginning to dissipate, revealing glimpses of the village through drifting white fog. He has 1 white phosphorus grenade remaining. The elderly man with the wounded leg speaks quietly to him in Vietnamese, then switches to English. "ARVN soldier," he says, tapping his chest. "No paths, no way. A former South Vietnamese soldier, wounded but determined to help." The teenage boy adjusts his grip on his sister, never complaining despite obvious exhaustion. These aren't the faceless civilians Hathcock has observed through his scope for weeks. They're individuals with stories, with courage, with a will to survive that mirrors his own. The question becomes tactical. How to move 11 wounded people across 200 meters of open ground to reach American lines with only 1 smoke grenade left. Hathcock's solution defies conventional military logic entirely. Instead of trying to move everyone at once, he uses his final smoke grenade to create a diversion on the village's opposite side, drawing most of the NVA soldiers away from his actual escape route. The explosion of white phosphorus on the hamlet's far edge sends enemy soldiers running toward what they assume is the main American assault. While they reposition, Hathcock begins moving his rescued civilians in small groups of 2 or 3, guiding them along a circuitous path through rice paddies and tree lines that he's memorized from weeks of observation missions. The elderly former ARVN soldier becomes his guide despite his wounded leg, pointing out hidden paths and warning about unstable ground with whispered words and hand signals. His knowledge of local terrain proves invaluable. He knows which dikes will hold weight, which paths avoid the deepest mud, which route offers the best concealment from enemy observation. "My village," the old man explains quietly as they rest behind a bamboo grove. "Live here 40 years. The teenage boy carrying his sister shows remarkable courage, never complaining despite his obvious exhaustion. When his sister stirs to consciousness, he speaks to her in gentle Vietnamese, keeping her calm and quiet." Hathcock finds himself thinking of his own family back in Arkansas. Would he have this kind of strength if his loved ones depended on him? Letters from home have been sporadic lately, but his wife's last message spoke of protests against the war, of neighbors asking hard questions about what American soldiers are really doing in Southeast Asia. Those questions feel different now, watching a 16-year-old boy risk everything to save his sister. The first group reaches American lines safely, a defensive perimeter hastily established by Marines who arrived ahead of the main reinforcements. Medics immediately begin treating the wounded, their practiced efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos Hathcock has just left behind. "Jesus, Gunny, what happened out there?" asked Corporal Martinez, the squad leader. "Civilian casualties caught in crossfire," Hathcock replies simply. "Couldn't leave them." He returns for the second group, then the third. Each trip requires different navigation as NVA soldiers adjust their search patterns. The smoke has completely cleared now, forcing him to rely on natural concealment and the former ARVN soldier's intimate knowledge of terrain features. On the final run, carrying an unconscious child while the boy's mother limps beside him, Hathcock hears helicopters approaching from the east. American reinforcements, arriving exactly on schedule. The NVA force, having lost at least 3 soldiers to his rifle and facing overwhelming odds, begins withdrawing deeper into the jungle. Medical corpsmen rush to treat the wounded civilians, several of whom require immediate helicopter evacuation to field hospitals. Hathcock watches the dust-offs lift away, carrying people whose names he doesn't know, but whose faces he'll remember forever. Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. When does saving lives become more important than following orders? The after-action reports struggle to categorize what Hathcock accomplished that morning in Unlock. Military analysts debate terminology, finally settling on an unofficial description: the smokescreen carry, a tactic that shouldn't work according to established doctrine, but succeeded through a combination of skill, courage, and intimate knowledge of local conditions. "You realize what you did violates standard operating procedures," Captain Morrison tells Hathcock during his debrief 2 days later. "Yes, sir. You exposed your position to enemy forces, abandoned your primary mission objective, and used military equipment for purposes outside its designated function." "That's correct, sir." Captain Morrison stares at the papers on his desk for a long moment. 3 confirmed enemy kills, 11 civilian lives saved, 0 American casualties. Numbers that look good in reports, but don't capture the complexity of what happened in that smoke-filled village. The old man you helped, turns out he was a former ARVN captain, fought with us for 3 years before he retired to his home village. The boy and his sister lost their parents in a mortar attack last month. They've been living with their grandfather. Information that makes the rescue feel both more and less significant. More because these were allies, people connected to the American mission. Less because it suggests Hathcock's decision might have been easier to justify than it felt in the moment. Burke approaches him later at the mess tent, where they're eating sea rations heated over burning sterno. The white phosphorus residue still irritates their throats, making everything taste like smoke and metal. "Gunny, you know what the other snipers are saying?" "I can imagine. They're saying you went soft, that you put civilians ahead of the mission." Hathcock chews slowly, thinking about the teenage boy's face when his sister opened her eyes and smiled, about the old soldier who insisted on helping despite his wounded leg, about the mother who never stopped protecting her infant even when she was bleeding. Maybe they're right. Or maybe they don't understand what you saw down there. The conversation is interrupted by Sergeant Williams, one of the hardliners who served 3 tours without questioning orders. His approach carries the weight of ideology tested by years of combat. "Hathcock, we need to talk." They walk to the perimeter, where Williams lights a cigarette and stares out at the jungle. The night sounds of Vietnam surround them. Insects, distant artillery, the hum of generators powering communication equipment. "You know what they're saying about you back at headquarters? That I saved 11 civilians, that you've lost your edge, that you're starting to think like them instead of like us." The accusation hangs in the humid air between them. Thinking like them, the ultimate criticism in a war where dehumanizing the enemy is considered essential for survival. "Maybe thinking is the problem," Hathcock replies quietly. 3 weeks later, he receives a letter from his wife. "The protests at home are growing larger," she writes. "People are asking harder questions about civilian casualties, about what victory means in a war with no clear front lines." The letter from home arrives on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the incident at Unlock. Hathcock's wife writes about protests growing larger in Arkansas, about neighbors asking harder questions. But tucked inside her letter is something unexpected, a newspaper clipping that changes everything he thought he knew about his mission. The article, from a stateside paper, mentions An Loc specifically. Not his rescue of civilians, but North Vietnamese reports of an American sniper who violated the rules of warfare by using chemical weapons against a peaceful village. The white phosphorus grenades, his tools of rescue, described as toxic smoke designed to terrorize innocent civilians. "They're using it for propaganda," Burke observes, reading over his shoulder. But that's not what disturbs Hathcock. What disturbs him is the realization that his smoke grenades, the very tools that saved 11 lives, can be interpreted as weapons depending on who's telling the story. The same white phosphorus that created concealment for rescue created terror for those who didn't understand his intentions. Captain Morrison calls him in again, this time with a different tone. "We've been monitoring enemy communications. They're calling you the White Feather Devil now. Not for your kills, but for the smoke attack. They think you were experimenting with chemical warfare." The irony cuts deep. Hathcock's most humanitarian act has become, in enemy propaganda, his most monstrous. The white phosphorus that saved lives is described as a tool of terror. The precision that he used to protect civilians is portrayed as precision used to harm them. "Does it matter what they say?" he asks. "It matters what you think about what they say." That evening, Hathcock sits alone in his hooch, cleaning his Winchester Model 70 for the 100th time since An Loc. The white feather in his boonie hat, his trademark, his signature, feels different now. What was once a symbol of deadly precision has become something more complicated. He thinks about the old ARVN soldier whose local knowledge made the rescue possible. The teenage boy whose courage under fire rivaled any Marine Hathcock has served with. The young mother whose protective instincts transcended nationality and uniform. Sergeant Williams stops by carrying 2 cups of coffee. Still thinking about those civilians? Still thinking about what makes someone a civilian? They drink in silence, listening to distant artillery. Williams has been in country longer than almost anyone, has seen villages burned and rebuilt, has watched the war change from conventional engagements to something more complex and morally ambiguous. "You know what's funny?" Williams says finally. 20 years from now, nobody's going to remember the strategic importance of An Loc. They're going to remember that an American soldier risked his life to save people who didn't look like him, didn't speak his language, didn't share his flag. And that's funny? That's the only thing that's not funny about this whole damn war. The white phosphorus grenades, designed as simple signaling devices, became tools of rescue in the hands of someone willing to think beyond conventional applications. But they also became symbols of something larger. The way tools, actions, and intentions can be reinterpreted depending on perspective. American reinforcements had arrived that morning to find Hathcock and his 11 rescued civilians safely within the perimeter. Medical corpsmen immediately began treating the wounded, several requiring helicopter evacuation to field hospitals. The NVA force, having lost 3 soldiers to Hathcock's rifle and facing superior numbers, withdrew deeper into the jungle. But the real consequences of that morning would unfold over years, not hours. 6 months later, back at Camp Pendleton, Hathcock sits across from a Marine Corps historian documenting sniper operations in Southeast Asia. The official record needs sanitizing, operations that worked, tactics that could be taught, lessons that could be learned without complications. "So you used smoke grenades to provide concealment for civilian evacuation," the historian says, taking notes. "That's correct. Standard tactical application of battlefield improvisation." Hathcock doesn't correct him. The historian's version reduces a morning of moral complexity to a simple tactical innovation. The smokescreen carry becomes an approved technique, stripped of its ethical dimensions and human cost. His wife notices the change when he returns home. He's quieter during dinner, more careful with words. She asks about Vietnam, about the war, about whether the protests are right to question American involvement. "I saw things that don't fit into simple answers," he tells her. Good things or bad things, human things, years pass, the war ends. Veterans return to a country that's still arguing about what happened in Southeast Asia. Some tell stories of heroism, others of horror. Most tell no stories at all. Hathcock becomes a sniper instructor, teaching Marines the precision and patience that made him legendary. But he never teaches the smokescreen carry. Some lessons, he realizes, can't be reduced to doctrine. In 1985, he receives an unexpected letter. The return address is unfamiliar, but the handwriting inside is careful, practiced English. Dear Sergeant Hathcock, my name is Nguyen Van Duke. You may not remember me, but I remember you. I was the boy carrying my sister in An Loc Village, October 1968. She lived. She became a doctor. I became a teacher. We came to America in 1978. I wanted you to know that your kindness in a time of war stayed with us. My students ask me about the war sometimes. I tell them about an American soldier who chose to save lives instead of take them. I hope this letter finds you well. Hathcock reads the letter 3 times before showing it to his wife. That evening, he takes the white feather from his old boonie hat, the one he wore that morning in An Loc, and places it carefully in a frame with Nguyen Van Duke's letter. The white phosphorus grenades that saved 11 lives had become symbols in enemy propaganda, tools of terror in one narrative, instruments of mercy in another. But the teenage boy who became a teacher chose to remember mercy. Years later, when Hathcock reflects on his career, he doesn't think about confirmed kills or successful missions. He thinks about that morning when the greatest precision required the greatest courage, stepping into chaos and uncertainty, trusting skill and instinct over doctrine and safety. The white feather still sits on his mantle next to the letter from Vietnam. A reminder that in the most impossible circumstances, small acts of humanity endure longer than the wars that create them. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story. What would you want remembered about your choices when everything you believed was tested?